But as that event happened on Tuesday, I thought, man, how appropriate is that? How appropriate is it that Sunday that I had prepared to talk about with our congregation where I believe God's leading us and what it is I believe that we're called to chase, that a guest of ours in our home would enter a chasing contest. And I didn't even put them together until later. But I think something about the chase is primitive, it's instinctive, it's natural. It's just downright fun. It's almost like we need a chase at times. And I came across an article in Psychology Today, and it had a couple of neat points on it. I've got the article up here if anyone would like to read it a little later. But here's how it starts out. Why do we love to chase? What is so intriguingly attractive about the hard-to-get partners, the Black Friday sales, or the very latest iPhones? Whether it's a trophy or a promotion or a slice of a popular pizza parlor or Twitter followers, desire simply gets us all fired up. This article is entitled How Desire Fools Us, and it's the benefits and dangers. It kind of does a compare and contrast between what the chase teaches us, and it's written by Emma Seppala. And she references a guy by the name of Brian Knudsen who works at the Stanford University. And this is what Brian says and kind of comes to, which I think is fascinating. He says, looking at an object actually activates our neural signals to release dopamine. Do you realize that this, like something happens in our head as soon as we see some object that we feel like that we want to chase, whether it's, state or a state prize, or maybe it's that promotion at work, or maybe it's just that individual that you've been chasing your whole life, and finally we're able to, she said I do too. Whatever it is, there's something that happens inside chemically in our brain. And we have this reaction, and it's almost like we enjoy the chase more than we enjoy the capture. The lessons that we learn by the chase are more important than the capture itself. And it just seems like sometimes we just need a carrot. We just need something dangling in front of us that we just feel like we're driven to find. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation. Mandy and I went out to dinner with a couple here in the church. And we started to talk shop, and this individual asked me, she said, so I'm curious about the process that you use, Steve, to determine what you're going to preach on. Do you use some sort of a triage process? Do you analyze the needs of the congregation as you determine what it is that you're preaching? Or is it just kind of an eeny, meeny, miny, mo sort of process? Are you using this Bible roulette process where you just flip through and you're like, I think the month of January, we're going to talk about 1 Kings 14? Or are you evaluating us and then based on those evaluations, determining your strategy? Now, some of you know me well. Basically, her question is, are you random or are you intentional? And for those of you who know me, you probably know the answer to that. I'm very intentional with a lot of things that I try to do. And specifically with the preaching schedule, I dive into what it is I believe that God wants us to do. And so today, as we walk forward in this talk, it might feel a little bit like the foreword of a good book. How many of you read the forewords of the books that you open? Okay. How many of you skip through the foreword and get right to the meat and potatoes? All right. Why? Because the foreword's not necessary, right? It's not important. I'm going to learn what he's trying to do or she's trying to do as I read the book. But for those of you who are forward people, I am one of them. Okay, I like understanding the context and the framework and the purpose of what this author's trying to do in this book so that I can kind of be ready for, that's what they're doing. Okay, now I came to the aha moment and I understand why you said this because you're trying to do this. So for me, I'm a forward person, and today as we go through this talk today, when we look at what are we chasing in 2018 as a church, you might feel like it's the foreword of a book, and that's on purpose. Because the foreword sets the tone, it sets the context for everything that we're about to do. And what I really believe is that God has laid on our hearts, and when I say mine and the leadership's hearts, in the direction that we want to kind of go in the next couple of years. Nothing changes with our foundation that we've laid. Nothing changes with our mission and our vision and our core values, which I'll get into here in a little bit. But this really kind of sets the tone for what we're going to do. And if you stay with us in the next year, what you're going to find is you're going to be able to point back to this sermon and you're going to say, oh, I get it. I understand why we keep talking about that issue. I understand why we're doing this event, because it points back to that reason. So it will feel like a tone is set, and you'll recognize some thematic elements. It'll even serve as a catalyst for things that we not only say, but things that we do. And so that's on purpose. It is kind of the forward of the book. It's not necessary, but it provides some clarity and purpose to what we're trying to do. So this past summer, in July, I started to pray about, God, what is it that you want Rising Sun to chase? And I spent some time camping with Christ when we were in that series, Camping with Christ. And I just sat at Jesus' feet and I just said, God, I want you to pour out to me, the leader of this congregation, who and where you want us to go. And one of the things that kind of popped out, there were three things that started to kind of manifest themselves a little bit. And after some personal reflection, some discussion with leadership, and some collective evaluation that we did in September, we all agreed that these things that I felt like that God was really kind of identifying for me, for us, were things that we all thought we needed to chase together. And as I said earlier, our mission and our vision, they don't change. Our mission is, help me, to grow in God's greatest commands and commission. To say it again, grow in God's greatest commands and commission. And the reason we're going to grow is because we're never going to arrive. Vince Lombardi once said, we're going to chase perfection. And as we chase perfection, we will find excellence. I love that quote. I think that is so rich, and that's what we're chasing. We are going to chase perfection, knowing that we will never achieve it. It's not until Christ comes back that we'll get it. We're going to chase perfection, but in that pursuit, we're going to find excellence. And that's what we're going to do here as a congregation. So we're going to grow in God's greatest commands and commission. And the vehicle that we're going to use to try to get there is the vision. It's the how. And we are going to build what? Family legacies rooted in God's Word. I want to hear it again. We're going to build family legacies rooted in God's Word. So those things are going to remain the same. And then we talked about core values about a year and a half ago. But just as a reminder, here are the things that are going to anchor us in turbulent times. Here are the things that we're going to help us as we use to measure ourselves against our progress. The first thing that we want to be known for is just to be a praying church. We want to be a church that prays for people. We want to be a church where people matter. We want to be a church where we inspire others. And then the last one, which we're finding is more difficult, but we're going to continue to chase, is to be transparent. We want to be a transparent congregation. We don't want any secrets. We don't want any surprises. So those things are going to be the same. But this last summer, three things kind of popped. These are going to be the things that we go for. And I'm going to ask you to evaluate them with us, to measure them, to hold us accountable to them, and to chase them with us. That's your participation piece. So here's the three. The first one that we want to do is try to develop servant leaders. Okay, that's the first thing that we feel like that we're called to do. We want to determine and dream about what the future could be. And the first time that this kind of manifested itself in July, I started to see and measure myself against it, seeing that there are people who, man, we love thinking about the future and we're dreaming about what could be, but we get caught up in the day-to-day grind and the details of where we're at. Leadership's difficult because you have to have this forward-thinking mentality and yet a nitty-gritty detail mindset also. But what we're doing and what we're seeing is that as God's calling us forward, our leadership are going to have to let go of some things that we're holding on to. And as I measured myself against this, I was probably the worst culprit in it. I was trying to be forward-thinking and yet still caught in today. And so what I started to do was let go of some of the responsibilities that are detail-oriented in the staff, or with the staff, and with ministry, and with programming. And I'll tell you, there's a completely different atmosphere. Once that decision was made after Alaska, I had decided this is what God's leading me to, because if He's leading me to this, then all of us really should probably be called to it with our leadership. I need to make some steps in it. And so Chris and I, we sat down. You remember this conversation, don't you, Chris? And it was the worst possible time for me to make this decision, because some details needed to be taken care of. But I had made a new commitment, not to be detail-oriented, but to be dream-oriented, to be futuristic in my mindset. So I had to let go of some things that I really instinctively want to hold on to. And what I found is that our leadership, I've challenged them with this same concept in September. We have several good men. We have great men. But what we found is, because of the necessity of ministry, some of them are in the position of leadership, and then they're also in the position of detail. And so they're trying to do both what we would call deacon work and what we would call elder work. And they're on unstable platforms because they cannot do either one very well. They're kind of average in both. And so the encouragement to the leadership in September was, guys, choose which one you want to be in. If you're called to be big picture dream, stand there and stand there well and chase it with everything that you have. If you're not called to be there and you need that nitty-gritty detail, choose that too. But in those decisions, what we found is that there's going to be a need for future leaders to come up. You're going to hear more about the plan of that in next week when we talk about our annual meeting. I'm going to save some of the details there, but I want you to understand that this is one of the things we're going to chase. The second thing that I feel like that God's really calling us to, and this might be a longer play, this might be something that takes a little longer for us to develop, is that I believe that we're called to develop and identify personal mission fields. I'm not talking about, helping the mission team. That's not what we're talking about, although that might be an extension of what we do. We are called, I believe, for each one of us to be partakers, to be equity builders in this thing that we call kingdom. This is our responsibility. Now, how do we do that? And how do we do that well? And if you want to get a jump start on where I think we need to go, where I think that maybe there's some good ideas and some good inspiration, you could pick out the book, Hugh Halter. I've talked about it before. It's one of my favorites, Sacrilege. And it talks about how to live incarnationally with our neighborhoods, how to love your neighbors, how to get to know your neighbors. Tangible Kingdom's another good read that kind of talks about these things. But neither of those are what I'm going to talk about today. The third one is really the one that I want to emphasize. And the third goal that I feel like that God's really laid on our hearts is to get real with each other. It's to go deeper. It's to love each other more. Man, we could talk about this all day long, but this is hard. This isn't some magic formula. This isn't some 1, 2, 3 sort of sermon. This is tough. I get how tough this one is. All the way through the Bible, we can find all kinds of examples about why relationships are important, how they're important. I can make case after case after case, try to be the most persuasive, eloquent speaker I can be about this issue. But at the end of the day, if we're not doing this, it's probably because there are some issues that we haven't been able to identify, or if we have identified, we're ignoring. So, by way of just kind of sharing some things out loud, Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24 says, "There's a friend who is closer than a brother." I know that there's kind of this natural instinctive thing that we want to be closer to people, but yet as we get closer, we don't know what to do with it when we got it, because it kind of scares us. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17 says, "A friend loves at all time, but there is a brother who is born for adversity." See, each of us really are kind of lonely. I get it. Chasing intimacies, not just formalities in our congregation, will be a difficult thing for us to embrace. Let me say it again. Chasing intimacies and not just formalities will be a very difficult thing for us to embrace. Even though we desperately want it, when we find it, it will be hard to keep, because we don't know if we really do. I often hear that Rising Sun is an incredibly friendly church. We're a very good congregation when it comes to welcoming and greeting. Where we might want to improve, though, is not just being friendly, being loving. You see, friendliness is not synonymous with intimacy. Nowhere in Scripture are we called to be a friendly congregation. Jesus didn't say, "A new command I give to you, be friends with each other. A new command I give to you, be really nice to each other." He didn't say that. He said, "A new command I give to you, love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples." If we want to be a church that's set apart, we want to be a church that's different, it will not happen through our programming. It will not happen through our pastor. It will not happen through our leadership. It will not happen through our strategies. It will not happen through our buildings. It will happen through us. We cannot satisfy or be satisfied and settle for niceties. There are biblical examples of the power of relationships all the way through, from the front to the back. Adam and Eve, from the very beginning, God said, "It is not good for man to be," help me, "alone." So God gave Eve to man and man to Eve. Okay, so they had a working relationship because from the beginning, God knew that they needed each other. And through that, you can even go through the patriarchs. Who did Abraham have as a close friend? He probably had his nephew/son before he had Isaac, Lot. Lot and Abraham were very close to one another. Moses had Aaron, Paul had Barnabas, and Peter had John. These are all iconic relationships in Scripture. They're all very significant. And yet, probably the most iconic in all of Scripture is the one between David and his best friend, Jonathan. But see, even in these relationships, there were flaws. With Adam and Eve, they introduced sin to the world. With Abraham and Lot, Lot wanted the greener pasture. And he found himself in a spot where he needed to be rescued because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Moses and Aaron, how many times did he sabotage the plan and try to sabotage the man in the relationship in the 40 years? You saw him grumble and complain about Moses' leadership. Paul and Barnabas had such a sharp dispute and argument. It's written in the book of Acts that we might use it as an example that even close brothers, even people who are extremely hitched at the plow with ministry, can find difficulty. Peter and John, probably arguably two of the best apostles known, it seemed like they had this jealousy factor with one another as you read through the Gospels. John kept alluding to himself as the one whom Jesus loved. In John's letter, he also said, "Peter started to the tomb first, but guess what? I beat him." There was a jealousy issue, perhaps. It seems like the things that we chase, the closer we get to them, the further away they become. And at some point, we consider jumping off of the track. Or, what's worse is, we do chase those things and we find that we have them and we don't know what to do with them when we got them. And so we lose them in the process. You know the worst thing about catching a snake? Letting it go. So here are some obstacles in relationships that I've identified. We're going to kind of fly through these. Number one, I think the most obvious obstacle in relationships is time. We have a hard time giving our time to one another because time is the most precious commodity to all of us in this room right now. We are so busy and we fill our lives with all kinds of different pursuits that for me to make time for you is actually one of the most remarkable expressions of intimacy that we can find with one another. When someone gives you their time, you should probably honor it fairly well. But when they're giving you their time, acknowledge that they're giving you a gift that they very rarely give to other people. See, we can make more money, but we cannot make more time. We've all been given the same amount. That's why giving someone the gift of time is an act of intimacy. And it's something that once we've given to someone, we can never get back. I want to read to you a new book. I had actually prepared this sermon months ago, and Mandy and I were walking through Barnes & Noble over the holiday. I think I saw this 2 weeks ago, and it's called, "I'd Like You More If You Were More Like Me." I saw it on the shelf, and I thought, okay, I got to get that one. And it's one of my favorite authors, John Ortberg. He has a very sarcastic and satire way of writing. I enjoy reading his books. And so even though the sermon was done, and I very rarely do this, I thought I have to read this book to see if I'm missing something. And there's this section in here that as I had identified that time is perhaps our largest obstacle, that he highlights and he talks about. It's close to the beginning. It's a book that I would highly recommend. It's the best book of the year I've read so far. He says this, the 10,000-hour rule. How devoted was Jesus to being with his closest friends? At best, we can discern, the Bible indicates that the disciples were with Jesus for about 3 years. So you're going to start, if you want to write some notes, there's some math here. Quantify these things. So there were some disciples that were with Jesus for 3 years. And let's assume that when they were with him for 10 hours a day. And for the sake of argument, let's say that they had maybe a day off a month. That would give the disciples 340 discipleship 340 discipleship days in the year. So now let's do the math. So if you take 10 hours a day times 340 days a year times 3 years, that equals 10,200 hours of discipleship with Jesus. Journalist Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, which is the next book I'm going to read because this is fascinating, writes about what he calls the 10,000-hour rule. The underlying idea of this rule is that it takes time to master a demanding craft. And 10,000 hours seems to be a magical number, whether it's playing the violin, programming a computer, or doing surgery, or hitting the curve. If we were to apply this idea to Jesus' disciples, what craft would we say they were mastering during their 10,000 plus hours with Jesus? Well, right about the time they hit the 10,000 hour mark, Jesus tells them, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples." So it might be said that time spent together or sharing experiences together is the key to mastering the art of living in an intimate relationship with Christ and each other. And that love is what defines our success. Where are you spending your time, and who are you spending your time with? The second relationship obstacle, I believe, is it takes work. One of the reasons why we struggle in relationships is it's tough. We have maybe some difficult experiences that we've leaned against. Honesty, selflessness, exposure, dedication, sacrifices, courage, humility, risks, painful experiences, effort. Those are just a few of the adjectives I could come up with as I thought about what kind of work is represented in describing relationships. We learn gradually over the years that relationships can be difficult. All of us do. And almost every relationship you encounter will collide with the decision for you to either double down, I'm going to stay with this individual, I'm going to stay with this group, I'm going to stay with this people, or to leave town, to escape, to flee. I've had such examples. I wrote this letter a year ago to my best friend. We were going through a valley. We hadn't spoken in about 3 or 4 months, which maybe some of you are like, that's not a big deal. It was. This was about the 3rd or 4th interaction, spark. Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man to another. What that means is you will have conflict in relationships. It's not, the goal of relationships is not to be conflict-free, but to manage your conflicts well. And so we had managed some conflict, but this one seemed like it was destitute. And so I say to him, I have never known companionship, brotherhood, or friendship with another guy to the degree that I've known it with you. When the relationship's on, man, it's as close to the definition of anointed as I can imagine. It is what I believe every relationship is meant to look like, and what I believe Jonathan and David's perhaps did. But man, when it's off, it kills. For the most part, I've been able to ignore the absence and relational distance, but I'm reminded of its pain every now and then. And when I think about or even catch myself reaching for the phone to share the valleys and share the experiences, the victories of life, that initial excitement is quickly lost to pain. There's no way around it. It just sucks. So, I adjust. I brush it off and I think, oh well, I'll move on. Only to repeat the cycle for the next time when I think, oh, I got to call so-and-so. I've accepted that we might never recover what we once had in life, and if that's the case, we'll both be fine and eventually embody that shrug whatever attitude that we see played out in so many other people. I will celebrate what once was given and cherish it, realizing those relationships are really, as they say, once in a lifetime. And if that is the foreseeable outcome, I felt it necessary for you to know just how extremely grateful and blessed by our friendship, brotherhood, and journey that I've been over the years. You've inspired me to push the boundaries that I've perceived as my limitations. You've taken some risks, and you've taken a hold of some you've told me some difficult truths over the years, and you've kicked me in the tail when I've needed it. You reminded me to get up, to keep moving, and I will be and am eternally grateful. And if this happens to be or is perhaps our last correspondence, I wish you the best in life, brother. Keep loving your wife to death. Keep inspiring your sons and daughters to find a greater joy in their true Father in heaven. Keep fighting for the faith. Keep inspiring your community and your church and other men to look beyond themselves and find truth. And for the love of Pete, keep taking ground from our enemy. He responded to me with a text. It was a meme that had some humor in it. And it was his olive branch. And we were able to reconnect and patch and repair. Listen, I understand that in relationships they're very difficult because you come to that point, every one of you do. You come at that point where you're like, is this even worth it anymore? I think they are. Because it's in the expression of love with one another that we get to be an example and expression of love with Him. The third obstacle that I find in relationships is pretty simple, but it's really just kind of decision. It's making a decision that I will pursue relationships. And I think most of the times we just simply don't. We've never really made a commitment because we know commitments can be scary. It means that by saying yes to this thing or to this person, it means I have to say no to something else or someone else. We look for our options, and we want to keep our options open, and so we refrain from making commitment. And G.K. Chesterton wrote this in an essay called A Defense of Rash Vows, and I think this is so good. He says, in the essay, he suggests that making and keeping a commitment, we transcend in some way the limits of time and we forge a lasting identity. He writes, the man who makes a vow makes an appointment with his future self. You know why we struggle in relationships? It's because I've never declared that I'm going to chase you. It's because I've never communicated to you that I'm going to do this. It's just like that diet that maybe we think we need to start. Or it's that financial goal that we want to have, but we've never declared it. You know what makes a dream become a goal? Writing it down. So write down a decision on somebody that you need to chase. The fourth obstacle I see is desire. Perhaps somewhere along the line you've had an experience, an ugly situation, conditioned, and it's conditioned you to believe that relationships aren't worth it. You've checked that box, and your experience has taught you a valuable lesson that you will always be indebted to, that relationships hurt. Because relationships hurt, a thing kind of starts to manifest itself in your mind. You start to think, well, wait a second, if relationships lead to pain, and I don't want to feel pain, maybe the way to get around this pain is to not have relationships. I know what I'll do. I'll isolate myself in this little bubble, and I'll make sure that no one can get close anymore, because if they get close, they can hurt me. So I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to make sure no one can hurt me again. And we convince ourselves of this dialogue so much that we think that we don't want so-and-so in our life, or we think that we don't want this thing in our life, and so then we start to think that we don't need them in our life. Since we don't want them, we don't need them. I'm better off without them. And we know this instinctive truth that those who have the highest needs have the least control. And I want control in my life, so I'm going to be the least needy person at the table so that I might be the most controlling. And we play the game. And that instinctive and primitive part to pursue each other devours us inside in our loneliness. It tells us that the people that we should chase, we should shut out. But it really never does go away, does it? You know why? Because you were created for relationships. The lessons learned in the chase are sometimes more important than the capture. One of the most powerful lessons in the chase is I think sometimes the things that we chase have a way of turning around and chasing us. My encouragement for you is to be slow enough to find them, slow enough to let them. I introduced Liam to you. One thing I didn't tell you was that there's some issues, as you can imagine, some backdrop, some framing that would take place, but he has a hard time connecting with people. It's obvious. When his mom and dad dropped him off, he didn't care. Mom didn't cry. I can't imagine that. Oh, kind of hurts thinking about it. So, in the last month, as I'd come home, "Hey, Liam, what's up?" He'd look up at me trying to figure out who I am. And we've got this little fist bump thing down, right? So now I can fist bump him. When I'd walk in, "Hey, Liam, what's up?" No, this, not this. Tuesday, I came home from meeting a guy in Kansas, which is a neat story. I'll tell you about it sometime. He took a small church that had a $500,000 debt, and in 6 years they're debt-free and have like $300,000 in the bank. So I'm curious on that thing. I want to know more about that. But anyway, I come back from Kansas. I walk into the door, and Gracie, as you guys have experienced, walks right up to me, gives me a huge hug. "Daddy!" Evan comes up, "Hey, Dad!" High five, gives me that man hug thing that we talk about, because it's weird, hugging other guys. Mom comes up, and she says, "Hey, honey," gives me a kiss. And the whole time that's happening, I'm not kidding you guys, all these expressions of love are happening, and I look over at Liam. And Liam, he's observing it. He's going, I don't know what's going on over there, but I've been seeing this, and I want some of that. So he gets down, and he pushes himself off the ground, and he starts running over towards me. Throws his hands up. It's the first hug he gave me. Guys, I know the pain. I know how difficult relationships can be. Don't isolate yourselves anymore. Let's be a church that loves each other. Let's be a church that looks like Liam. Hey, I want some of that. But it's your call. We can't force it. Can't convince you. I can only tell you this is what you're made for. God, thank you so much for who you are and who we are in you. I pray that as we chase you, that you would chase us relentlessly. That we would give up running.
Sometimes we probably all feel like that, don't we? Anyway, we've got several announcements to make. I'm going to start it off by saying, as Steve mentioned briefly, next week is the Rising Sun Church of Christ annual meeting. According to our bylaws, we hold a meeting the third Sunday of January every year. We'd really like all of you to attend. There's going to be a potluck starting at 11:45. That will last an hour. And then the meeting is scheduled to start at 12:45. Hopefully it will last somewhere around an hour, I'm guessing. So we'd really like you to attend. It's not going to be an all-afternoon thing, so don't worry about that. So please join us for the annual meeting next Sunday. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Sorry, Sarah. There will be child care provided by Dylan and Nancy.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Gonzalez, and I'm really excited to share with you that we're going to be starting up the Welcome Center. Chris has ordered a really nice banner, and we're looking for volunteers to help us cover the Sundays. And I would love to have enough volunteers that, especially for summer, we would be able to cover with people going on vacation and whatnot. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, it would be great if you could just meet me at the Welcome Center. And if you're like me, we parked on the other side of the parking lot for a while. And so when I first heard there was a Welcome Center, I was like, there's a Welcome Center? So that's going to be by the westbound doors, by the cafe, you'll see them. And so, yeah, if you'd be interested in helping out with that, you can stop by and I'll just get your information, and that would be great.
Good morning. We are so excited. Night to Shine is less than 4 weeks away, and we set a goal of 100 special guests to be here. Guess what? I have 102. I'm so excited. Woohoo! But now I need you. So to take care of that 102 guests, we need buddies. And so some of you have already signed up. We already have 65 buddies on our list, but you can tell the difference between those two numbers. So we need quite a few more. So what we're hoping is that you would be willing to come and escort one of our special guests around for the evening. You'll get to enjoy a catered meal. You'll get to ride in limos, sing some karaoke, and dance a little bit. So it's going to be a really, really fun night. We really need your help. If you don't feel like you can do it, maybe you know someone who can. All the information is on the website, and so you can send folks there and have them go ahead and get signed up. We don't want them to wait till the last minute because we do need to get background checks on folks, so make sure that they go ahead and do that pretty soon. And we also need a lot of paparazzi. So if you're thinking, man, I don't think I can dance all night, that's all right. The paparazzi team is going to be there to greet the guests as they come in. And so we're going to need folks that can clap and can cheer and can be clicking cameras and that sort of stuff. You can sit if you need to do that. So there is something for everybody to do to help out with Night to Shine.
And last but not least, we thank everybody who has stepped up to help us already. We are so excited. We cannot wait. Things are falling into place. We just got to get this one little thing, get over the hill with this one little thing, and that would be amazing. Team leads, we have a meeting tomorrow night from 6 to 8. In the bulletin it says 6:30, but we are meeting from 6 to 8. And thank you so much. It is Friday, February the 9th from 6 to 9. Yep, and all the volunteers and everybody will have to be here early. The special guests will show up at 6:30 or at 6. Usually they come a little bit before, but all the volunteers would need to be here before. And Sandy had mentioned the paparazzi. The paparazzi only has to be here for an hour. I only need you from 5:30 to 6:30, and then you're free to go. Okay? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bill. Last week in your bulletin, you should have received one of these from Fame, and it's the Cardboard Pharmacy. And so basically what that is we are collecting over-the-counter medications and drugs that then will be then shipped over, to somewhere around the world to help people who need that kind of stuff. So if you would be interested in helping us to collect some of that stuff, we have a display out here in the foyer. And then on this list, it gives you everything that we are collecting. And so it's only for the month of January that we are collecting this stuff, and then at that time we're going to ship it to Indiana, where Fame is at, and then they will ship it around the world. Just one thing I will let you know of is if you're gonna donate, just be mindful of the expiration dates that are on those over-the-counter drugs, because they need to be more than 6 months before they expire. Okay? Thanks.
Sorry. I guess the annual meeting was already announced. One quick thing that we want to make sure everyone hears is that Shannon Wolf and Ashton Wolf went to the ER today, and Ashton has pneumonia, and they're testing him for asthma. He has asthma, but they're testing him for RSV, and so our prayer is that he's not positive for that, because that would be a bad case scenario for him. The little kid's had a lot of medical issues, so we just want to lift the Wolf family up in prayer as we are dismissed. Why don't we stand?
Will you pray with me? Father in heaven, we lift these concerns to you this morning. We also go forward out of this building and take what you have given to us. The love, your never-ending love. May we show that to all those who we come in contact with. Bless us throughout this day and throughout this week. All this we ask in your Son's name. Amen.
Everybody hopes that maybe somewhere down this road we'd finally find that place where we belong. That place where we're complete, the one that occupies our dreams. That place we're lucky to call our home. Well, I have arrived, and I can't keep a